really excited to bring this event to you this evening. But before we begin, I'm Christy. I work at Belmont Books, which is hosting this event for you. We are an independent bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts, and I will be dropping some links to where you can purchase both Yoga Bones and the Yoga Effect through our store. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll ask them at the end of the chat and demonstration. And this event is being recorded, so if anyone is unable to attend this evening but is interested in revisiting it, they can do that on our YouTube. And yeah, that's what I've got. So I will pass it along to our panelists. I will ask you to quickly introduce yourselves if you don't mind. And yeah, it's all yours. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
I guess I'll go first. I'm Laura Staton, and I am the author of Yoga Bones, and I wrote another book about 17 years before, actually, which both my kids are in as well, called Baby Owen, Yoga for Mothers and Babies. So for me, this is more just like a continuation and a trajectory of using yoga to be helpful for your body and mind. And I'm really excited to be doing this with Liz and Holly, who just wrote this amazing book having to do with, you know, the more psychosocial and psychological things. So.
So I'll go next. I'm Holly Lebowitz Rossi. I'm a freelance writer and the proud writing partner of the wonderful yoga teacher and yoga therapist Liz Owen. We've written 2 books together. The first was called Yoga for a Healthy Lower Back, and our most recent is called The Yoga Effect, a proven program for depression and anxiety. And we're here in this first 10 minutes or so to 20 minutes or so to chat with Laura and kind of be in conversation. So do the other 2 on the webinar want to introduce yourselves before we get started?
Michele, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, my name is Michele Gennaoui. I am a longtime student of Laura Staton, and I will be doing some demonstration poses that are in the book, as well as some others.
And my name is Liz Owen, and I am Holly Lebowitz Rossi's writing partner. I'm honored to say that. And I had the pleasure of meeting Laura a number of years ago at Samankaya Yoga in New York. And then that started things. Laura contacted me about her book, and I was thrilled that she was writing it and very honored to be able to write an endorsement for it. So I'm here as well in the question and answer period that Holly and I are going to conduct.
Okay, so let's get into the chit chat part, and then we'll move our bodies. Really looking forward to that. So Liz and I, in introducing ourselves, are talking about our partnership, and that leads perfectly into my first question, which is about the collaborative nature of a yoga book, and something that there's so much that I found to admire about your book as a writer. And one of them is the ways that you manage to thread the needle that's so hard to thread, of offering scientific information as well as yoga teaching and wisdom and practice in a way that was both accurate and accessible. These are 2 words that we used a lot in thinking about our book. So we're a partnership, but you are kind of a self-contained partnership in terms of your background between the yoga therapy, and occupational therapy medical worlds. And so I wondered if you could just sort of speak to the teamwork that undergirds your book, and how you thought about it as a collaborative process between the experts that you consulted, but also knowing that your readers might not have the knowledge and the background that you bring to the book.
You know, I really wanted it to be, that's a great question, thank you. And I really wanted it to be super accessible because so much of healthcare, I think, can feel kind of intimidating for people and maybe not super accessible. And sometimes yoga therapy books, they tend to get so into like why this is good for you and you know why yoga is good. It's kind of like preaching to the choir, like people get a yoga therapy book because they actually want the help. And I know that there were a lot of times when I would go to sort of a continuing ed course for OT, and I'd feel like really what I wanted were some clinical skills that I could use immediately. I didn't want to hear all about, I didn't necessarily want all the like a day of evidence-based research. I wanted some skills that I could use clinically. And so I felt like it was really important for people who are in pain to actually be able to have a place to go and have it be easy for them to find the information. So it was really important that it was accessible and clear and not sort of fussy, you know, like not sort of full of what it will do for you. So I wanted it to be very practical. And I guess I also wanted it to look good because I think aesthetics are helpful for learning. You know, I think if things look good, then, and they're laid out clearly, then you can, then they'll be less intimidating for people to approach. And I wanted it to be friendly and warm, you know, so it was engaging, so people didn't sort of feel like, oh, this is such a drag to have to do these exercises or asanas. And so Julie was a photographer, was a dance photographer I worked with years ago when I was professionally dancing. And if you can photograph dance well, you can really photograph anything well. So she's, you know, pretty renowned in the dance world. And then the illustrators was this person that I know, and he happened to live in Spain, but he was a very talented illustrator. So I kind of got the aesthetic team down. And then in terms of the people that I had sort of vet the information, that sort of came as I was writing it. You know, I have family members that are in healthcare, so they were like super helpful and super critical. So that's always good. Like it's good to have people read your work, you guys, right? Because you want people to have it be critical. And then I had people in the hospital that would read it, who I felt like were more knowledgeable than I was about certain things, you know, PT related. I just really wanted to make sure it was accurate and clear and usable. So it sort of it all came together in that way, like the team sort of assimilated itself. Chiropractors, because I had some real questions on the spine and stuff like that.
Yeah, that, you know, and that really, it resonates, your relationship with your readers really resonates with what Liz and I always talked about and thought about, because really people who are coming to all three of our, you know, all of our books, they're suffering, they're hurting, they're in physical pain or emotional pain, and then the emotional pain that comes from being in physical pain for a long time. So being able to write in that clear way and empower them with information without either underplaying it and saying, just trust me, this is good for you, or overplaying the kind of technical scientific speak where people would feel overwhelmed before they even get started. I think you've done such a beautiful job with that in Yoga Bones.
You know, self-efficacy, it's funny, self-efficacy is a big buzzword in OT. And it's really great because, and I'm sure it is with, you know, well, Liz, you're a wonderful teacher, but with the book that you wrote, because what you want is you want to give people tools to be able to help themselves, you know, because I think there's so much of drowning sometimes in your own anxiety and your own sorrow and your own pain, you know, whatever kind it is. And that makes you feel lonely, that makes you feel, you know, isolated and lonely and unempowered. So I think giving people like this feeling of like, you can do it. And sometimes it doesn't even take that much, right? Like, so I think that was important too, to give people a sense of ownership that things can change.
Yes. Yeah, and so you're speaking about the aesthetic of the book, and something that really stood out to me was how thoughtfully you chose models that represented different ages, different body types, races, ethnicities, abilities. And you know, there's so much conversation broadly right now about representation and inclusivity. I wonder if you could talk about how you made those choices and what were the values that guided those decisions.
Well, I mean, a couple different things. One of them was that I've been a New Yorker for so many years. I'm a New Yorker. I came from Boston, right? So I'm like a very urban person. And I really wanted the book to reflect that sort of like urban feeling of a little bit no nonsense that I just feel like that I have. So that in an urban feeling, an urban environment is extremely multicultural and ethnically diverse and age diverse. And so that was just incredibly important. Also, there are a lot of conversations I was having with my kids about, and also in the yoga world about cultural appropriation and the sort of Caucasianness of yoga. And I think that those are all important conversations to have. And I didn't want a yoga book that just sort of perpetuated that narrative as well. That to me felt like, ugh. And so it was very important that we had sort of a demographic, because in a way I saw it more of a healthcare book than a yoga book, and so healthcare is inclusive of everyone. And there's a lot of prejudice in healthcare as well, which I think family healthcare is starting to have a lot of discussions about too. But I just wanted to sort of just be as expansive and inclusive as possible. And I was happy with how it came out. I think that shows in the book.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and it really gets that across. So my last question before I turn it over to Liz is something that we have in common is that we've had a book come out during a time of pandemic, and there are challenges and opportunities with that. The Yoga Effect came out just a couple of months before the pandemic started. And Yoga Bones is launching kind of as we're starting to reemerge. And there's so much kind of overlap between that moment and what people are going through, and then how helpful a book like yours can be to people who are hurting and need that support. So what's it been like? What's it been like publishing in a pandemic?
You know how it is, you're so excited, and then you get a book out there, and then people reach out to you, and some events like this are very interesting and helpful and empowering too. But sometimes I don't really know, you know what I mean? Especially in a pandemic, you probably don't even really know. People are like, how's the book going? I'm like, well, I don't know. Who knows really? But it feels like it came out at an interesting time, because it's really about developing self-efficacy and a home practice. And I think that there are also people that are probably in urban areas, even before, of course, the pandemics, we didn't know this was going to happen, that getting an OT or a PT or a medical appointment or, a psychiatric visit or even going to a yoga class is just not attainable or accessible or practical. And there's probably a lot of people in the country that don't have this, all these wonderful resources that I know I take for granted. And so it really was based on the idea that people could use the book as a home practice. And that's why the cover is all about people doing yoga in their home. And so I was sort of hoping it could sort of come across that way more. And then also lastly, we were just starting to learn how important prone breathing was in the hospital and in rehab. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of eye-opening, because they were in our hospital, we didn't prone patients, but in other hospitals they did. And that takes a lot of staff and a lot of effort. And, but it's important. And so I sort of didn't realize, I kept learning too. And so I felt, so we got that chapter in at the very last minute, the importance. And we didn't mention COVID, because that just felt like it might not be helpful, but we did mention respiratory distress and stuff like that. So that actually literally did change the book, because we got that section in, which I think is helpful too. So it's been sort of weird, I think, but but interesting,
Absolutely. Okay, Liz, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. So I have to say, when I was reviewing the book, Laura, I just want to make one comment about the prone breathing. And I thought, wow, that's prescient.
Yeah.
How did she know that?
I
Right?
didn't.
And
We were
so
having
that's really,
in-service.
that's so interesting. And it
Yeah.
was perfect timing for you to be able to
Yeah.
get that in your book, because I think we all learned a lot about prone breathing and its benefits. And we had not known that before.
Right. I
So,
went through, Michelle, remember
yeah.
I was going through a whole phase where I was like, we're prone breathing, prone breathing,
Yeah.
prone breathing.
That's right. Okay. So my questions to you have to do with more about your progression through your passions and becoming a yoga therapist. So the first one is just that, which came first. I read your bio. I read that you graduated from Juilliard in dance, yoga teacher, yoga therapy, occupational therapy. How did they all come together to inform your clinical OT practice and your therapeutic yoga teaching?
I mean,
I think I know sorry.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer to which came first, and that was your dance, but I'm not sure. But just if you would say something about how they all led
Yeah, I'll
to
make
where
this
you are
short
now.
because it could be long, but definitely it was dancing first. And then I had to detox from college. And I could not do another modern dance class. So I found yoga. And I just found that it both dramatically helped my anxiety, which I had as a young person, and still do, but like yoga has really helps that. And so it dramatically helped my anxiety, and it helped me get stronger as well. It helped me physically get stronger. Even though I was a professional dancer, I still had a lot of weakness in places. And then from there, once I had a baby, again, with my kids, I really learned that it was important for me, for my own sanity, to maintain my yoga practice, because it had been with me as a professional grown up for at least a decade before that. So then I kind of got into writing Baby Om. That was sort of a fluke, but it was cool that we did it. And then out of that, I was working with all these atypical babies that weren't sort of, not atypical babies, but they weren't sort of progressing in this sort of age appropriate sort of paradigm that you have, like 7 months you should be rolling. If you're not rolling at 7 months, that's something to look at. So it was like all of a sudden some of our moms and their kids were going to OT, and I was like, oh, what's OT? And so I really came into OT late, thinking that I would be like a pediatric OT and I would do early intervention. And like, I didn't even like it. I don't do any of that. I don't think I'm good at it. But I really liked working with an older population. So it kind of was a progression like that. It just kind of, and I guess in terms of what brings them all together, it's the body and also movement analysis. Like I really felt like with dance, you do all kinds of like energy and movement analysis and performance analysis. And then with yoga, you do a lot of same thing, movement analysis, and it's different, it's more integrated. And then with OT, I'm just constantly looking at bodies and seeing like what would help them. What do they need? Like if you have 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 90 minutes, what, one day, one visit, 3 weeks, what would be good for them? And so I feel like those skills I've been able to cultivate those skills for years now.
Nice. That's a nice coming together of all those skills. Okay, so last but not least, and I know we're running out of time for this, but if you can say a few words about the role of your students in your own progression. And
oh my God, Michelle should talk about that. I practice everything on my students.
Yes.
I mean, I never did. If I was working on a chapter like the SOS chapter, I would spend 2 weeks with my students, and I'd actually ask them for feedback. I asked Michelle a lot for feedback because we've been together for so long.
I learned so much about anatomy in my yoga classes with Laura. I didn't know names of muscles before.
But I made sure that every single chapter I would do on them first. So they were really like vetted, and I took things out and put things in. They were like, yeah, that's hard to explain. We don't really understand that. And I would be like, well, if I'm like actually physically here trying to explain it to you and touching you, and you're still not feeling it, then it's probably not good for the book. So And then I really wanted to get students that had worked through those exact issues, just like I'm sure you guys did. Like if with anxiety and depression, you have to have people that suffer from anxiety and depression to know if it's to know if there's actually sort of an outcome measure that's realistic. So I really wanted, and so many people have issues. So it was really easy because like half my students had issues. My sister had a shoulder replacement. My yoga teacher had a shoulder replacement. Someone had a hip replacement. Someone else had a knee issue. 3 people had herniation. So it was very easy to just get them, because I was working with those issues anyway.
Beautiful. All right, so
So yoga?
moving on, we're going to hand it
All right, we're gonna
back.
do
Yeah,
yoga.
I think.
Okay, good. So we'll come back to more questions, right? Because I want you guys, I'd love if you guys could talk about your book too. And so Michele is going to demonstrate, and I think that we're going to split the screen so people can see Michele. And what we decided to do, and I would love it if people at home wanted to do this too. We're going to use a chair, and Michele, what else? A belt? Oh, and a couple blocks. If you have a chair, a belt, and a couple blocks, but you also could just watch because this is going to be videotaped. And the first thing we did is something that we did for our very first book event, because we were still in the middle of, not in the middle of COVID, but like, I don't think even the lockdowns had eased up yet. And everyone's hip flexors were tight and their posture was crap and their back hurt. And so we were just like, we've got to stretch the psoas muscle. We've got to get people to just literally stand up straight. So this isn't in the book. This just came from that. So Michele's going to do that first. Okay, so Michelle's so you guys, if you have a chair at home, just put it against the wall so we don't have to worry about you falling, or the chair. So you can just put a chair against the wall and stand, I think, about 2 feet away. Good. And then she's just gonna collect herself, lift her abdomen up. Good. And then thanks. Yeah, she's such a good student. And then good, lift her abdomen up and find her alignment, press down through her feet. And then she's gonna lift her right foot up in the center of the chair. Good. Right in the center of the chair. Good. And then all she's gonna do is move the body forward. Oh, can't see the demo. I wonder if we could make Michelle's screen, maybe spotlight Michele. Because I think it would be good if her screen was bigger. So maybe, yeah. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Whoever said that. Okay. So hold on to the wall, Michele. So you see right now, her back foot is parallel. It could be even a little bit internally rotated. And when you're sitting too much, the hip flexors, I'm talking to the audience, not to you guys. The hip flexors, of course, get so tight from all the chronic sitting, which really pulls on the lower back. And it really it turns into a big mess. And the psoas muscle is a muscle that connects the lower extremity to the spine. And this one, especially if she can now maybe go a little more forward, Michele. Yeah. And even lift up. She's holding onto the chair, pressing down a little bit. And then if she even wants to lift her arms straight up, good. Then she's really getting to the psoas muscle that's attaching more to the lumbar vertebrae up there. And so she's really getting a stretch for the whole hip flexor area. And if you could do this, every hour that you were sitting, you could get up and do this, then I think that would be really helpful for people, because people were just sitting. Okay, so good. And release. Okay. Oh, and then, let's throw in the hamstring. And then we just decided to if you wanted to just straighten your leg and reach your arms up, so you're actually working your back extensor muscles a little bit, and bring your arms to the wall, Michele. Exactly. Then she can actually just add a hamstring stretch as well. And if, of course, there's like a herniation or something like that, you want to, bend that knee that's up. It might be too much for the back, even the flexion. So you might want to avoid this. But if you're just needing to stretch your hamstrings, then I think this would be something that she could do as well, and then come up. And so we're not going to do both sides out of time. So people at home, I'm really sorry, but you should do the other side when we finish. Okay. And now the next one was something actually, which I think is really helpful, where Michele can stand at the wall, the corner of the wall. Good. And I have this in the book. Michele, when she first started working with yoga, she has, we call it kyphosis, right? Like a little sort of curvature of the upper back. And she was a sign language teacher for the deaf for many, many, many years. So you can imagine, like being a therapist, right? You can imagine, or a surgeon or a dentist, all the things that you do that make your body kind of hunch over. Michele really had. So this was helpful for her to put her whole back against the wall and even try to get the lower back against the wall, you know, which is possible because the feet are away from the wall. So try to broaden the lumbar, broaden the abdomen, lengthen the lumbar spine, lengthen the hips down. So the lower back is against the wall here. And she can, if she wanted to work her neck extensor muscle, she could push her head back a little bit, but she doesn't have to, but she could do that. We have that in the book, good. And then she could just bend her knees and start sliding down and make sure the thoracic spine and the sacrum, as much as possible, are on the wall, right? And if there's a lot of curvature, you could always put something under the sacrum to keep it, you know, to pad it if there was too much, if the kyphosis was a little hyperkyphosis. And then from here, it's also working the legs, so that's helpful. You could just bring the arms up. You could do breathing, which would also just bring the arms up and down a couple times. Michele, inhale and exhale. Good. She's going nice and slow. That's great. We tend to rush. So we're trying to be slow. And she's going up and down. So this is just good for breathing and, you know, getting the body a little more oxygenated and the intercostals and the diaphragm working. And then she can bring her arms up and just bend the elbows. Oh yeah, hold on. She can, right, hold on. We practiced this before. Hold on, lift the elbows, lift up the side body, and then she can bring her hands to the back. Good. And then sort of, you know, do that Iyengar thing where you're bringing the elbows a little bit forward to get the outer shoulders organized and the lats organized. Good. And then she could walk her hands back, and then you can release and come down. And so what that does is it allows your back, your spine, to get what we call proprioception, which is the sensory receptors of the nervous system feel contact, and then they kind of understand where their body is in space and where their movement is, you know, because a lot of times people don't feel their back. And if there's a problem, that whole area feels like an area that's ethereal. So I think that's helpful. So we have that actually. It's, I think, the first thing in Michele's chapter. And then another thing, which is just good for everyone. So everyone should try to get up and do this if you can. If you have a yoga strap, you could use, like, you know, I don't know, it looks nice. Okay, well, I'll read that in a minute. You don't have to do it on a corner, you guys. You could open a door and do it on a door, or you could just, yeah, open a door. I've done it on the door before with a lot of people. It doesn't have to be a corner. And you could use a block behind the back too. You could use 2 blocks and do it that way. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to do shoulder floss. They call it shoulder flossing, like in therapy, because this is sort of something where they're working a lot on trying to work the nerves and get the myelin sheaths a little more, stretched out. So this is something that's considered to be good for that. So she's doing a wonderful job keeping her shoulders down, and then externally rotate the arms, sweetie, a little more as you go. Right, the biceps roll up towards the ceiling. That's it. And then she's pulling. You see her left shoulder is pulling up a little bit, right? So that's probably her tight shoulder. So you can do it. If this is impossible and your arms are bending, you want to widen the arms a little bit. That's it. So you can see her right shoulder is probably a little dominant. So if she did this in front of a mirror in class, she could put a block between her legs. And this is actually also just really good because it's uplifting, you know. And you're also working the muscles of the back, at least the superficial and extrinsic muscles of the back you're working. Okay, good. And then good, Michele, thank you. Okay. And then we had to put in, I've recently become really obsessed with the anti-gravity muscles. I just did a workshop on them yesterday, actually. And those essentially are the muscles that keep your posture erect and resist gravity. And as we age, or if you have jobs or occupations that, you know, you're going like that, it's really important to not just go into the flexion, but to strengthen the muscles along the back of the body. And we'll be talking about a little bit about those more. And that's something, speaking of your question, Liz and Holly, that's something that came up when I took a continuing ed course for fall prevention for geriatrics. They talked about the anti-gravity muscles, and I was like, oh, well, that's like really literally all of yoga or a lot of yoga, you know. Yoga has so many gifts. So Michele, let's see your cobra. And this is a very accessible one. So everyone can just lie down and make sure your feet are pointed and your toes are reaching away from you and your legs are parallel, everybody, okay? Her pubic bone is on the floor, and you want to just think about protecting the lower back by moving the sitting bones up into the pelvis. It gets the deeper muscles, the intrinsic muscles a little more, the multifidus, and so you're not kind of cramming into the more superficial back extensor muscles. And then there's like a million things to do here, but for this one, I think, Michele, if you come more in a forearm position, so you put your hands in front of you, yeah, that's right. Then even for people that don't like going prone, you could do this on a bed. You know, if you had a hard mattress, if it's hard getting to the floor, you know, so a lot of these things can be adapted for people. Like if this doesn't, you could actually do this against a wall too. You could put your forearm, you could put your elbows on a, you know, bureau. But right now what we're doing is pressing the hands down, kind of pulling the hands towards you a little bit so she can broaden across her shoulder blades and her collarbones and try to lift up her head, lift up your chin. Good. So we want to get the neck extension in there because there's way too much flexion. And then go ahead, sweetie, and then just extend the elbows up, broaden across the collarbones, pulling the outer shoulder blades. She's doing a good job of that, right? Outer shoulder blades down the back, broadening across the collarbones. And now this is a pretty mild baby back bend, but you're working the posterior chain, at least of the back extensor muscles and the neck extensors. So that's extremely important. And you guys who don't do yoga, this is like, wouldn't you say, Liz, this is like half, like so much of yoga works on this kind of material. So, and then you can go down. Good, Michele. Good. Okay. And then I don't know what time it is, but, oh, we have time. Okay. And then Michele, you know what? Why don't you just show one thing since we have a little bit of time? Can you put your chin on the block?
Okay.
This is like my new obsession. Don't put it that high though. Don't put it that high. Okay. Now this seems like I did not put this in the book because I didn't want people that had like a super unstable neck to do this and possibly just feel or even get anxious about it. But if Michele were to stand up from here, what she would actually be is in pretty much a standing position, because a lot of what happens with neck flexion is that when you move your head forward, and part of the problem with yoga is that there's a lot of neck flexion and there's not that much extension. And then when we extend, we often crash back. So this is something that will actually stretch the tight muscles of the back. And if she removed her block and just had her head there, that's a perfectly safe position. And her muscles have learned to sort of isolate and co-contract and sort of isometrically contract. And then from here, we've even done it with a block higher, but I don't want to show that. But we do it a lot in class. And then she could, from here, her head is already in a good position to then move up into back bend, move up into cobra again. That's it. So then, see, her head is actually more lifted now. I mean, we could probably go back and see, but her head is more lifted because there's so much tightness and so much of a natural flexion we have, because the head is 10 to 12 pounds. And from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, your body is carrying those 4 little suboccipital muscles plus your neck extensor muscles are carrying that much weight. And the minute that your head goes even an inch forward, so think about all the people that do this for work, if their head goes forward, that adds that much more weight, another 10 pounds, another inch, it's like another 10 or 12 pounds on top. So if you're forward craning, oh, Michele, sorry, you can come down. So if you're forward craning at all, your head is now weighing like 36 pounds. If you're forward craning 3 inches, like I'm doing right now, my head is now 36 pounds. So it's really important to be able to strengthen the back extensor muscles right through here. And that's why they're so bulky and tough and like bulky. And we always want to massage them because they actually do work constantly. So I've gotten really into neck strengthening and strengthening for the whole back. And then the last thing, I do think mask wearing exacerbates. Yeah. The last thing, which I'm now also obsessed with, are the importance of the calf muscles. And I didn't know that until I started researching it. And so I talk about the calves and yoga bones, but not in the way I'm going to talk about them now. And so Michele, yes. So Michele, that's good. So get on like that. Michele's going side. You can step on the blocks. You guys, you can do this on the floor, but I have the blocks just so she can add a stretch. She can add a stretch to that Achilles tendon, which is huge, of course. But she's putting a block between her legs just to stay stable. And we have to really work on not sickling and beveling the feet out, right? So there's good alignment. But the calf muscles, especially the soleus muscle, which is a deeper one, is a slow twitch muscle. And it's essentially responsible and works all the time when we stand up. Like it's never not working. They've done EMG tests with this. And the gastroc, which is the bulky two-headed muscle on the back, is the one that sort of feels like it defines our calf. That's a fast twitch muscle. And that's responsible for like jumping and, you know, skipping and hopping and moving. And both of them together form the triceps surae, which if weak, you really have trouble actually walking up an incline. You might have trouble going upstairs. And, oh, Michele just bent her knees. Now, did you, keeping an eye on it. Because weakness is indicated if you do this and your knees bend. There, oops, see, that's a little bit at the top. And it's not like dramatically weak, but you can sometimes have one calf, like the dominant leg is stronger than the other leg, and then that's going to impact the gait. So I've started to do this now with my classes. Like I'm obsessive now about the calves, and I'm realizing in my own body how weak my calves are. And your calves are the thing that really hold up your tibia bone. They do this sort of closed chain action with the over the foot. And thank you, Michele, she'll do it front now. And so it's very important that you have your calf muscles to anchor yourself against the force of gravity. That's why they're considered almost not, I don't want to say the most important anti-gravity muscle, but they get both equally mentioned. And then all the neck extensors and gluteals and stuff are thrown into one category, the back extensors, right? But they each get their own starring mention because that there's such important postural muscles. So she's going up, she's doing a really wonderful job keeping weight on the ball of the foot and the first toe, and she's sickling a little bit. So that's just going to indicate where the weakness is. We all have it. If I did it, I would have it too. And then when she stretches her calves down, her heels down, she can just let it go, let go, let go, let go, right? So then you get a stretch. So the blocks look kind of like, you don't have to do it on the blocks. We're just doing it on the blocks because we can, and we have the blocks here. So you guys at home, just check and see how that is going for you, and know that it's like, it's not just about the quads, you know, and the glutes and the hamstrings, that also you have to work the calves, especially as we age, because they're really, and they're like a plumb line for our body, the calves and the hamstrings too. Thank you, Michele.
It's fun.
Okay, so I guess that's it. That's it for our demonstration. So that was 5 that we tried to sort of work through the whole body and align people.
So I don't know. I think the questions that we're getting in chat are not visible to everybody.
Okay.
So but we can see them. And I wondered, one person in the audience said that this practice that you just showed for upper back rounding and kyphosis felt maybe too much for her because she has a bone-on-bone arthritis condition. And so that kind of got me thinking, how do you advise people to use the book for, like, how do you guide people to make decisions about what's too much for them? They might be working on one issue, but they're actually having another challenge interfere with their ability to fully do the practice that are so clearly laid out in the book.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all. And so I definitely wanted to do things that would not contribute to any injury, and they may not exactly be helpful. But if the bone on bone, maybe in her facets or something, I'm not sure, is that much, then what I'd really want to do is work on traction with her. Like I would do lengthening work and supported hanging work and have her hang from her hips. Like I think there's something in the book where somebody's hanging from their pelvis. So I have that, yes, on the doorknob, do hanging work, put the hands on the chair. So there's no gravity, there's no compressive forces. So I would probably start with something else, work up to Tadasana. So sort of like elongated Tadasana, maybe. If you bring the arms over the head, you guys, bizarrely enough, that just works the paraspinal muscles. So I start developing the spinal muscles with her standing, not in prone perhaps, and maybe not something like have as much tactile sensation as, you know, the spine against the corner. So I could, you know, talk over on Zoom with her if she wanted to about this, but it doesn't mean that those things won't help her, but they're not necessarily going to get her where she needs to go now. She can back up a little bit. Like the thing about yoga and therapy is that you can always grade things up, and mental health too, right? You grade things up and grade things down depending on where people are at. So that's really great that that person, that woman, knew what was too much for her. So that's fabulous. That's great. That's great. Perfect.
I want to introduce a comment that someone said. And this was when Michelle was in the lunge.
Okay.
She was in the lunge with the foot on the chair. I've always been taught not to extend the knee forward over the ankle and instead to make ankle to knee 90 degrees. So we all know where that comes from, right? That's Iyengar yoga, or my experience of that is.
Right.
So is it safe to extend the knee beyond 90 degrees?
Well, it
That's the
is.
question.
It's funny, even in Iyengar yoga, and I know I grew up with that too, but even in Iyengar yoga, there are these poses where your knees, you know, your feet are way underneath behind your knees, like Malasana. And then there are all these poses that do that. And even lunges where you can go forward like that. And I think it's basically one of those things that is not like a golden rule, but it's turned into a rule just because you don't want to do compressive actions with the knee in an unstable position. But the knee is not in a particularly unstable position because it's lined up and your weight is on a chair and your hands are at the wall. You know, if your knee's feeling all unstable, you might not want to lift up your arms. But I really think if the pelvis is going forward, the knee has the capacity to flex beyond 90 degrees, right? Because that's just a 90 degree, I don't want to move my camera, that's just 90 degrees. I mean, the knee, you know, if you have a sort of typical knee, I have one typical knee and one not, it's like 135 degree flexion or something in that knee. Mm-hmm. So you definitely, I think it's safe to do that.
Yes, especially if the knee is oriented front to back over the ankle.
Exactly.
Well, right? Not falling inward or tipping out.
Thank you for saying that. So like it's all, the whole chain is lined up, all the joints. You have to line
the
up
chain is aligned. Yeah.
Right, right. But if the joints are lined up, then that really should be kind of fun feeling because you're going to actually stretch the front of the ankle and all kinds of stuff. The calf gets stretched. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that was helpful. She said, thank you.
Yes.
I hate not answering questions like to people's satisfaction. Okay.
So another question in the chat was from me, because when you were talking about putting the block under Michelle's chin and really like training the muscles and nerves to sense what it is to be aligned, I was thinking about how throughout the pandemic, I struggled a lot with suboccipital issues, TMJ, and I finally had this aha moment that I'm wearing this mask and just holding my head and neck and jaw in ways that I hadn't before. Is that something you're seeing a lot? And is there a chapter in the book for that?
You know, it's funny. I'm feeling that because for a long time we wore N95s, and actually we still often do on the floors wear N95s. And I would be wearing my N95 and then another mask, and I would be like, why does my jaw hurt every lunchtime? Because I'd be having it on for 4 hours. Because I was doing all these weird contortions with my face to try to make it more comfortable. And so I totally think that happened with masks, and also our anxiety of probably like retreating, like we're just all doing all these strange guarding patterns as well. And I do have a neck chapter in the book that actually I think is pretty helpful. And it talks a lot about what happens when we have this forward extension, this sort of head thrust. I always like use my boyfriend as the example of that. And I was like, do you ever get mad at me? He doesn't care. But he's an IT guy. So his posture, he's like so much like this. And he started actually doing yoga once a week, not with me, with another teacher. And he's really learned how he has to like understand how to lengthen these muscles, but also strengthen these muscles. Because it's not that these are just tight and strong, they're tight and weak, you know, and these muscles in the front are also weak. So you have to sort of do a multi-pronged approach for the front and the back. So I try to do that in Yoga Bones. Also, I did study with a yoga therapy teacher that was obsessed with people having pencils between her teeth. Have you ever seen that, Liz? Like she just like, if there were hip imbalances, she worked with a dentist, she would like put a pencil between everyone's teeth, and you'd do like a practice with a pencil horizontal. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. I don't think I could get away with that, at least at the hospital I couldn't. But I think
don't know
it's
that.
interesting because it will free up the holding patterns we have. And of
Mm.
course, massage and all that kind of stuff is helpful too. But I totally, completely can relate to what you said. Yeah.
Are there
Are there any other questions from the audience? We have, I think there's oh, good. Christy's coming back here.
I'm back on screen. Hair's up. I'll be doing shoulder flossing every day for the rest of my life. That was amazing.
Oh, good.
So I'm here to see if anyone has any questions, if Liz and Holly would like to discuss the yoga effect a little bit. I know we talked about doing that. If anyone else has any other questions about whether about the demos or about kind of more generally.
I think you guys should talk about the yoga effect a little bit. I loved the book. I think it's such a good book.
Before we do that, let's give Michele a little kudos. So here's Michele in the book. This is chapter 7.
Yeah.
And this is Michelle's chapter. And there she did a beautiful, I've been looking at you thinking, I know she's in the book. I know I've seen that body before. So there she is. And she does the whole chapter 7 and she did a beautiful job. And I just want to reiterate Holly's point about every model in the book is varied, different ethnicities, different ages, different genders, and it's really nicely covered. And that's pretty critical these days. So that was one of the things that I loved about the book, just so you know, from the get-go. And so you're from Boston, you are in New York. I grew up in New York, and I grew up in Queens,
Oh, wow.
New York. And, Queens, New York was full of people of all color from the very beginning, that was how I grew up.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything but that until I moved away. And then I was shocked.
Right.
And I'm still kind of shocked actually, but
right.
So this is the critical thing for our time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, somebody wants to know where you teach in New York, Laura.
Oh, I teach a Samam Kaya one day a week, and then I teach in now I have one class at home in person, but they could go to my website, laurastaton.com, and I have Zoom classes, 3 of them a week or something. But I'm not back to that much live teaching, just one little class a week. But Zoom's
It's in Brooklyn, though.
It's in Brooklyn. Sorry. Oh my God. Sorry. Yes, I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah, it's in Brooklyn. Yeah. Just so.
Yeah.
Wait, you teach in Brooklyn. Samam Kaya is in Manhattan.
And I teach in Manhattan. If that's online, I do Samam Kaya online still. Zoom.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of teachers are still Zooming in New York.
Yeah, so are we.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's different, but it's nice to have the accessibility of the Zoom yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's nice to have. And that was something I was wondering about, Laura, with the book, was like how you managed kind of like instructing on things like modifications, like we discussed, things like ensuring everyone is people are practicing from the book in ways that are safe and healthy, like in book form when you can't be there to kind of touch and adjust.
I think that's where I came up with the notes section, because I had notes and then I would try to say where you might feel it and what you might be looking for and what. So I tried to be like the teacher in that little section, but, I think people actually have to really listen to their own body too. And one of my friends, she has a frozen shoulder. And I think it was in a really early stage, so she barely had any movement. She was like, oh my God, I did something in your book and it felt so good. It's like the best thing I've done, more than therapy, more than anything. I was like, oh my God, what was it? And she was like, well, it wasn't in your frozen shoulder section. I was like, okay, that's great. Thanks. But
one of the things I loved about the book was how detailed the directions are. When I'm in class with Laura, she's going through the body and there's so many moving parts. And in the book, it's very clearly outlined in a bullet format how to approach the pose. I mean, you can look at the picture and try it, but then there's these detailed instructions. And the notes are in there that if you can't do this or you want to go a little further, I thought that was really helpful.
Yeah, I have to give credit to my kids for that because I had them reading it. And one of the most challenging things was actually writing that. Like you'd think it wouldn't be that challenging, but to actually write so people can feel what you're doing and not have it just be this sort of boring thing. I made it really technical. And then my Miles, especially my younger guy who was here from COVID, he was just like, oh God, no, no. So I like almost rewrote them all with his help. And I would talk and he would do them. Him and his girlfriend Flora would do them and he was like, he knew yoga, but not yoga well. So he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you just said. Like, get out the yoga, get out the anatomy, get out the yoga speak, just be normal. And I was like, okay. So that was helpful. So that actually took a lot of thought to do that because it's easy to fall into jargon. And I really wanted to not fall into any jargon because that's just alienating.
Well, that's why it feels like class, because in class, that's what you'll say. You'll give us 30 directions for one pose going through the body. And that's, I would follow each part of the body listening. And it's exactly like that in the book. So
hopefully not
good
30.
technique.
I tried to make it more simple, but yeah. But people
And that's why I
ultimately-
consider myself very lucky. Sorry,
No,
go ahead.
No,
Go ahead,
I
Laura.
was just say people have to listen to their own bodies, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So in our partnership, that's why I consider myself so lucky to be Holly's partner, because Holly would do everything I wrote and then rewrite it
Right.
so that it was readable, understandable, plain language, right? And
Right.
made it very accessible to
Right.
the reader.
Right. Well, and also what I loved about your book is that it was based on real studies that had been done at Harvard, of course. So, I just was like, you weren't just sort of saying, I think this can help. It was like actually like evidence-based as well, with like, and so I just think that's really helpful for people that have anxiety and are struggling with self-management, that there's something that can literally has been proven to help them from like clinical studies of that,
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. That was the point of the book. Holly, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to quote you, Liz, and say that the book is based on research that was done. It was actually BU, Boston University School of Medicine, NIH-funded studies that have been published in journals. And this is our book, The Yoga Effect, a proven program for depression and anxiety. And I love how Liz describes it, that the studies showed what people who practice yoga have known for, time eternal, which is that yoga grounds the body and centers the mind. And yoga is good for brains. The studies that were done, I always love to have the mouthful of saying, my co-author is co-author of a set of studies that that looked at a yoga program in great detail and how it impacted people with major depressive disorder and a number of anxiety diagnoses, and then measured through self-report and also MRI images the difference that the yoga protocol made. And so our book, The Yoga Effect, is a home version of that same protocol that was studied, meaning to offer it to people so they can practice it in their own homes. And there's nothing in the book that was not included in the studies. So we were very true to the research in that way, which I think is so important to ground. And that's one of the things I love about Yoga Bones is how it's grounded in medical knowledge and Western science, but also equally grounded in Eastern wisdom and yoga technique and practice.
Mm-hmm.
That's my 1 minute. Liz, what do you think?
That's perfect. Yep. So they make a good pair of books, yes? Buy the books, get the books, and you're kind of set for your home practice for the next few years, I think. Or you can come to our classes.
Yeah, if you'd like to share any links to your classes or where attendees can find you, feel free. We are at about 8. If we have any final questions from our attendees, you can go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A function. But otherwise, what a cool event! It's been so fun to get to see the poses in action and kind of get to talk about this thing that as bookish people we don't always get to talk about our bodies as well. So very, very cool and fun. And thank you all so much for your time, for being here, for supporting this independent bookstore. We are so thankful, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank everyone who came and watched and spent an hour with us. I really appreciate it. I know time is precious, so we appreciate it. And thank you, Liz and Holly, too. This was really great to meet you face to face.
Yeah, our pleasure. Lovely event, Laura. Thank you.
Good.
It was wonderful. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. And thanks, Michelle, as always.
Thank you.
And Belmont Books. Buy books from Belmont.
It's a great bookstore.
Contact microphones are in the chat, so we'll, that's where you can get them.
Exactly.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Christy.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye, you guys.